So welcome to Horatio's Garden event, The Glory of the Garden. I'm Olivia Chappell, and I'm the founder and chair of trustees of Horatio's Garden charity. For those of you who don't know the charity, we're really delighted to have you here, and thank you so much for joining us on the evening. We are a national charity, and we're building beautifully designed, thanks to these amazing people, gardens in NHS spinal injury centres. So gardens that are right at the heart of the NHS in what can be often very challenging environment, of a built environment, creating beautiful spaces that enhance people's well-being, their mood, their sleep, their outcome, and really giving them an opportunity to find somewhere to find a little bit of hope after what are life-changing injuries. These are people who, like you and I, may be just going about their normal business, and then for some reason they slip. Life changes in an instant, and as a result you can face a lifetime paralysis and 6 months or more in an NHS hospital. It's an incredibly tough time, learning to live a new life, shattered dreams, changing perhaps your prospect of work, your way that you're going to mother your children, and doing all of that in the confines of a very public ward is extremely difficult. So Horatio's Garden is changing that, and I'm delighted that the work that we've been doing over the last 10 years has brought us almost 7 gardens in NHS spinal injury centres, of a total of 11 centres. Our mission is to bring these gardens to all NHS spinal injury centres to make sure that no one should have to go through such a life-changing injury without access to nature and a beautiful garden. So it's our enormous pleasure to be here. We're really grateful to the Conduit for hosting us. We feel that we really do have a lot of parallels, and we hope that we are change makers, really. There aren't organisations that have built gardens in the challenging surroundings of the NHS as we have, at the calibre that we have with incredible designers. So it's very exciting to be here in a venue that shares our ethics and our beliefs, and the sense that if we can all collaborate together, we can really create change for the better for all of us, but particularly for the most vulnerable in our society. So I would like to thank I would also like to thank the amazing organisation Project Giving Back. Project Giving Back are funding gardens for good causes and have transformed the funding for charities to be able to come to the Chelsea Flower Show, have main avenue gardens at Chelsea Flower Show, as well as smaller gardens. And we were very, very fortunate to be the beneficiary of their funding, which enabled us to have the garden at Chelsea this year. So thanks to the incredible Project Giving Back, who also announced last night that they're going to be continuing their funding for next year, but also 2 years beyond that. So it's really exciting for a huge number of charities who are going to benefit, like we did, from some very forward-thinking funding. My thanks also go to some people who really do embody, I think, the ethics of Horatio's Garden, but also of the Conduit. 2 amazing women, and I can't see them, but they're called Pip and Sarah, and they're here somewhere. They're volunteers from Horatio's Garden. They're incredible floral growers, and they grew the flowers, they brought them up from Dorset, they arranged them, and their whole business model then donates everything that they raise to Horatio's Garden. So it's really a fantastic circle for change. Thank you so much to Pip and Sarah and Wild Artichoke Flowers. So it's my enormous pleasure to be sharing the stage with 4 of our incredible, 5, sorry, James.
You're right.
Whoops. 5 of our amazing garden designers. And I was going to, the reason I said 4 is...
stop digging, Olivia. Okay, just stop now, go.
So, James Alexander-Sinclair, is our second Horatius Garden designer after Cleve. James designed Horatius Garden in Glasgow. He's also, we're very proud to say, a trustee of Horatius Garden. And for tonight, he is our compere, our Val Dunican, our everything. And I'm going to now hand over to James on his high chair.
Thank you, Olivia, very much indeed. It was all going so well until the end. Yes, as Olivia has said, the reason why we are gathered here together, in fact, those two, they only count as half each, I think, probably, rather than one, is because we've all had the enormous privilege of having been asked to design a garden for this extraordinary charity. And it all began, as so many bad things have, with Cleve West. Basically, who designed the first one in Salisbury, and then I did the next one, which is in Scotland, and then yours was last year it opened. Yes, so last year, and then this is the spirit of Christmas yet to come. And this is Sheffield at the other end, and we haven't started yet, but we will do soon. Sarah and I are actually better than all of them because we represent an entire country. In that I own Scotland and she owns Wales, whereas they just basically have to divide bits of England between them. But basically the reason why we're here, or the motivation behind us being here, is if you cast your minds back to the beginning of the summer, back to May, and you go to the grounds of the Royal Hospital in Chelsea, and the Chelsea Flower Show is going on, and all around you are not just beautiful gardens, but lots of women in floral dresses with white trainers. And the Chelsea Flower Show is in full swing. And you walk down Main Avenue at Chelsea, and to your left and to your right are glorious things to see. And along that are the big Main Avenue gardens. And this year, we had the privilege of all of these people swanning about, drinking quite a lot in certain cases, and showing off gardens. And what basically we're going to talk about is we're going to talk about their experience at Chelsea, how it went, what's happening, what's going to happen to their gardens afterwards, how Chelsea has changed, all of these sort of huge and exciting subjects. And so we're going to start off obviously with the oldest member again. So we're going to start off with Cleve. Cleve, how many gardens have you done at Chelsea? I'm going to see if I can find a picture of your garden, because basically everyone would have forgotten what it looked like.
I've got to that age where I actually can't remember.
I think that your first one was 2000...
2001.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, so yeah, that was...
So I've done about 7, I think. 7 or 8.
7, and you said, and I quote you directly, last time you did one, I'm never going to do this again. And then we look at the list, and 2023, Cleve is back again. Why?
Well, there was a caveat. I said I would never do this again unless it was for a charity. And then Centrepoint came along, and Project Giving Back with their amazing support came along, and it was a no-brainer because it wasn't using Centrepoint's money. So that was the main driver for that. Plus the fact I came up with a good idea literally within about 10 minutes of talking to them.
But you didn't tell him it came that
fast.
You said, it took me years for this one to gestate. Yeah.
Yeah.
What was the good idea?
A demolished house to be a real sort of visceral metaphor for homelessness. Mm-hmm. And I thought they'd be mad if they go for this, but it would be a fantastic one to bow out on. It's almost like sticking 2 fingers up to the establishment.
Yeah. So how did it work? What was the idea for people? Some of you must have seen it. You've seen it on the television, or else you were there, or something like that. Tell us, just remind us about how it worked and what happened.
What, the actual garden?
Yes, the actual bloody garden. That's what we're here to talk about.
So yeah, I floated the idea of a demolished house, and they looked at me a bit strangely. But eventually they came round to the idea, and you couldn't get a better metaphor for homelessness, an actual demolished house. And I just thought, plus the fact it had sort of hidden messages about biodiversity there, which we can talk about later, but I had my stepdaughter who lives in Peckham. She's got a Victorian semi-detached house, and I thought if we could just imagine that in 2,000 years' time or 100 years' time, where it's just knocked down and the weeds have sort of infiltrated. And so basically the demolition sort of acted as a metaphor for people's lives being disrupted, people being uprooted. We had a tree that had fallen down, so that's a literal metaphor for being uprooted. And it was just too powerful an image for me to shake off. And so the weeds sort of growing amongst all this destruction was actually the work that Centrepoint does in actually stitching people's lives together. So the weeds are sort of pioneer plants that sort of...
The weeds was what all the fuss was about, wasn't it? There was a huge amount of unnecessary fuss about
it.
weeds.
I was a bit angry about that at the time, but actually I think it did us a lot of good in the end.
I think, well, you may remember there was every tabloid newspaper saying Chelsea's full of weeds and it's the year of the dandelion and all this complete and utter nonsense.
Yeah, they tried to usher the king past our garden very, very quickly. He did. All credit to him, he did actually stop.
He stopped. Of course you did. Stop and have a look at it. Okay, so that's yours, and then Sarah, your garden, which was not a Project Giving Back garden, but it still had a purpose and a reason to it, which has good things to say, and it was not that one. Tell us the story of your garden, which is this one.
My story is it's less. It was less instant. In 2016, I went to the Floral Marquee, and I think it was 2016, Sarah Cook, who was head gardener at Sissinghurst and who is a collector of Benton irises, had a stand there showing these incredible Benton iris, which were, they're bearded irises, but they've got incredible... the colours are really hard to describe, kind of muddy purples, greys, golds.
How did they start? What happened? I mean, who invented a Benton iris?
Oh, okay. Benton irises were invented by the artist and gardener Cedric Morris. Really in the 1950s, he bred these irises. And he became famous for them. And also famous for his work painting the iris. So he created these amazing still lifes. Again, the backgrounds to the irises were kind of like these strange muddy yellows and purples and blues and pinks. And I saw these iris for the first time at Chelsea Flower Show, and I thought, wow, I've got to make a garden around these one day. I had already done a design for a garden the following year. So I just held on to that idea, and then... quite by chance, I actually visited Benton End a few years ago, and the garden...
Which is where?
Which is in Hadley, Suffolk.
Yeah.
Doing your job well. I'm out of verse. And it's recently been kind of bequeathed to the Garden Museum, and there's not much left of the garden because after Cedric Morris's death, all the plants were dug up, and in the 1950s, 60s, it was a art school run by him and his partner, Let Haynes, where Lucien Freud, Maggie Hambling went. It was a really bohemian, captivating, eccentric place. And when you go to the garden, you go to the house, there's lots of echoes of this. And it's kind of not been touched. Things have been taken away, but the trees remain. And so I sort of thought back to this kind of love at first sight with the Benton iris in the Chelsea Marquee, and going to the gardens and the house at Benton End, and then looking at Cedric Morris's paintings and thinking, wow, he just puts together colour in such a peculiar, odd way that's so playful and rich. Wouldn't it be amazing to make a garden that could echo some of these things? And
which is what you've done. Which is what you did.
Which I played with.
Did in May, and it was a triumph. And I mean, it is. I don't quite know how you make an iris. Do you know how to make an iris?
No.
Does anybody know how to make an iris? No, well, anyway, he knew how he managed to get that. It must have. You think in order to get that one particular Benton olive or something like that, you had to go through so many other ways of doing it. Anyway, we shall get into the finer points of making irises later. So finally, well, not finally, sort of on the end, Hugo and Charlotte, who basically, as I said, are going to be making a garden for Horatio's in Sheffield, and you basically had a dry run. You had a rehearsal, didn't you? Basically, is how it worked.
Yeah, and it wasn't a stressful rehearsal at all. This felt like a really special garden for many reasons, but I think actually what it was it stopped at Chelsea on the way to Sheffield. That's how we always felt about this garden. So yes, a dry run, but an opportunity to talk about the work of Horatio's garden on a big stage. And I think, you know, there are lots of questions around Chelsea's sustainability as a show, but actually it has impact. People come to the show and they watch it on TV and they read about it. And we really wanted to make the first adaptive garden for Main Avenue, for Horatio's garden. And that felt really important. We wanted it to be made from sustainable materials. But really what we did for the first few months was we didn't put pen to paper. So we went and talked to patients and NHS staff and head gardeners and volunteers at a number of the Horatio's gardens. So that was a really important part of the process, really. So it's a slightly different, not such maybe a conceptual approach as these guys.
Well, it's basically you had the garden first and then you adapted it for Chelsea rather than going to Chelsea and then going on the other way.
Absolutely, yeah. So, and I think we've made gardens at Chelsea and they've always gone on somewhere. But truthfully, and I think most people's do, but there is a little bit of a kind of wiggling round peg in a square hole, or whatever the saying is. But this is different. This was designed entirely in parallel. So there were challenges within that, but it was just this kind of really wonderful opportunity to share the work of the charity at Chelsea, really.
And so how did it sort of start? Were you sort of rung up by Olivia and said, will you come and do Sheffield?
Do you want to do... The truth of the matter is Olivia rang us the week before we went into the build for Chelsea 2021. And as these wonderful people know, you're quite knackered by that point. You're excited, but you're tired. You've been worrying about it. Well, I'm quite an anxious person, so I've been probably sleepless for quite a long time.
Nightmare you are about these things.
I know. And also for Chelsea 21, it was the one in autumn, and it had been put off about 3 times, so we kept kind of ramping up, and then so it was quite a long period. So we were raring to go to start on site, but quite tired. And Olivia rang up and talked about Sheffield, and then in the last 5 minutes said, "Oh, just one thing. We're thinking about taking it to Chelsea first." And
she had waited until we'd said yes to Sheffield bit, and then she dropped in, "Can we take it to Chelsea first?"
Hugo looked like he was going to cry because he was so tired. But actually, the more we thought about it, the more it just felt like a really amazing kind of symphony of things coming together. And it still enabled us to bring in the things that we like doing as a practice, which is storytelling. So we like layering stories of place into our garden. And that enables us to create connection when it goes on to Sheffield. So there's connections with the cutlers in our water feature, and kind of a number of the decisions around the garden was really influenced through that lens.
So we know exactly where your garden is going, is headed to, and it's sort of the process has begun. And I know that the building's in a storage somewhere, and other bits and pieces are lurking around. Where's yours going, Cleve?
Mine's going to Centrepoint's. The Legacy Garden's going to Ealing.
There's a bit of a shit picture behind you of it.
He's so rude. I've known him for so many years.
We'll go back to the pretty one, shall we?
He normally shows videos of me naked, which is even worse.
If anyone wants to give a lot of money to Horatio's, I shall give you that video.
Maybe it's the other way round. If you don't give a lot of money, we'll show you that video.
There you go. We're back at that one again. Yes. Yeah. What's going to happen?
Yeah, mine's going. So it's going to a centre in Ealing, borough of Ealing, and obviously it's not going to go lock, stock, and barrel like it was because it's built out of demolition stuff mostly. So we've just created. They've got a garden there which is by a very, very busy road, and there was just some fortunately, it's got some trees that act as a buffer. So we're just underplanting the trees, making the terrace a bit more presentable than making a vegetable garden. So we actually planted it in June in that hot spell, which was quite tricky. So we've had to put irrigation in now. So it's ongoing. I'm doing the next phase of planting any moment. So.
But your previous Chelsea gardens, the 7 others, they went places as well.
Yeah, a couple of them.
In bits.
Yeah, a couple.
One of them, I will tell you a very interesting story about it. One of them is actually in my garden. Or quite a lot of it is. I nicked a lot of rocks from one of your gardens, and they're now in my garden.
Yes, I did actually see that picture. I'm still waiting for the check.
It doesn't work. But it was. But previously, the idea was basically the bits went to different places, and what we're trying to encourage is the whole garden goes. So the essence of this garden has now reappeared in Ealing.
That's right, except for the rubble, all the
Yeah,
bricks
yeah.
and rubble. But I think we've been doing that for years, like Charlotte was saying. You try and use as much as possible. So it goes without saying that you do that, but I think they're making a special effort to...
And then the purpose of that garden, that's going to be used as a drop-in centre, or how
No,
does
it's
it work?
it's where I think there are about 17 young people who use that place. They live there for up to about 3 years, I think, and they have jobs. I think most of them have jobs, so it's just a place to stay. Homelessness, I've learned so much about. There's so many different factors affecting people. You can be homeless for all sorts of different reasons. And I've had very little engagement with, because of confidentiality, I've had very little engagement with a lot of the homeless people. I went into it with rose-tinted specs thinking, oh, it's going to be lovely, you'll have these all homeless people helping, planting, because we know gardening does everyone good. It doesn't work like that with homelessness. I mean, people have got really complicated lives, and so that's been a big education for me. And I'm still hoping there will be some engagement as we go down. Once the garden's finished, people will think it's not as rubbish as it looks.
You had a lot of engagement with the people who work with Centrepoint, though, didn't you?
Yes, a lot of engagement with them, and we did have a residential course at Windsor. So we had 5 young people who came and experienced horticultural, went to a nursery, spent some time on at crocus. I gave a talk about garden design. So they had a lot of insights, and they went to visit golf courses and learned about land management. So, 5 people had some experience about gardening. So hopefully that will inspire them.
It works. And then, Sarah, yours is going to Benton End one day.
It is.
Yeah.
As Cleve touched on, it's difficult to sort of ship the plants straight to a location when the location isn't ready for the plants, and you've got to then water thousands of perennials. So Crocus have set up propagation, especially of the Benton iris, because currently in the UK you can get them from Wootton's or Beth Chatto, but there isn't really a large-scale grower. So they've got someone in the Netherlands, and they've got their own propagation units, and then all the water bowls, all the bricks are going there, because the existing hard landscape is from the 1980s. It's really bad, kind of concrete pavers.
It's one of his jobs.
It's quite recent. It wasn't 1980s. It was much more. It's last year.
The little fountain, yeah. So everything will be used, and also the processes in the Chelsea garden that we trialled.
Tell us about your pots and things like that, which you can sort of see.
So I wanted to make a garden that was sustainable but also beautiful, so people wouldn't necessarily walk up to it and go, oh, this is a garden made out of waste, but essentially it was. So the water bowls and planters were basically created from digging holes in the ground, mixing demolition rubble or bits of old glass with a waste binder called GGBS, which is from the steel industry, basically slag. You mix it up and then you just let it air dry. So it dries in about 4 weeks, and then you can polish, if you wish, the interior, and it looks like terrazzo. So it was really low-tech materials, and the bricks were made in a similar way. We made the brick moulds. The boundaries were straw bale with lime-based and waste render. And also I had a friend who's a scenic artist, and they have a lot of waste-used canvas. So
that side wall, isn't it? Yeah.
So the colours, that was all canvas and reclaimed wood from scenic builds, and then painted them with a traditional linseed and rye flour, and woad and different burnt umber mixes. So, there was incredible attention to detail.
There was a lot of innovation in the whole thing, because I think that one of the things that Chelsea has embraced over the last year or so is the fact that we don't want any waste. I mean, I did a garden there in 1999. At the end of the garden, somebody came in with a digger and chucked the whole thing in a skip, and that was it, gone. And it's pretty appalling to think of that, anybody even considering doing that now. So you're reusing it and trying to get as many different things in a sustainable way as possible. as were you, says he, neatly limping onto that end.
Yeah, we actually, similar to Sarah with the waste and GGBS binder, that was effectively our surface as well. And all the gardens we've done at Chelsea, we've designed to go on elsewhere. And I think actually designing the gardens to start with, knowing that you're going to rebuild them, makes you think of the detailing in a different way, knowing that you're going to relocate everything. And obviously with this garden going to Sheffield, absolutely paramount that every single item, we spend the money really wisely because we know it's going to go up to Sheffield and we need to build it in a way that can do that. And the biggest challenge for us was the surface, an absolutely smooth, flat surface, which is permeable, which allows those in wheelchairs and beds to go over it without any bumps. In a way which could be relocated was such a big challenge, and we were looking at it for ages going, how are we going to do this? How are we going to do something meaningful and what is being redone at the Horatio's Gardens at Chelsea without it then having to go in the bin afterwards? And I think the usual surface is a resin bonded gravel, and we just knew that we couldn't reuse that after Chelsea. That would have been broken up. So we looked at and invented a new material, which was waste materials, specific sizes of aggregate, so that when it was bound together, it kept holes in it to be porous, and then spent weeks and weeks trying to develop a way that we could make big slabs of it that could be lifted, placed at Chelsea, and have a joint which was the same material that we would put in and then grind it down at the show. And then we've even got like metal lifters that with a metal detector at the end of the show, we can find the lifters, break out a little bit of the stone and put our lifters back in so we can lift up the jigsaw piece effectively back again and take it up to Sheffield.
So all of that is now also stored somewhere, and that will end up in Sheffield as well.
That has all gone up to a nursery, which is being held where the garden building's being stored, all the stone for all the cairns, the water feature, the flooring, our trees, everything has been taken up.
I'm trying to find your drawing. So that's Cleve's bit rubbish drawing. Yours I think is slightly better than Cleve's.
That's Hugo's, not mine.
Hugo's drawing. So this is basically Sheffield, isn't it?
Yeah, and it's 8 times the size of Chelsea, and that was another thing. Was when we're, representing Horatius at Chelsea, what do we do at Chelsea Flower Show? We can't do everything, and it's really important that we don't try and squeeze the whole of Sheffield or the whole of a Horatius garden into a Chelsea garden, and try and keep it simple and just really showcase the best of what Horatio's does. And so we had to choose our elements really carefully. So the surfacing material was really important, the garden building was really important, and water and the vegetation, the trees. But as you can see in this much larger picture, there will be the other elements of a Horatio's garden with the glass house.
And actually those priorities were established by patients, and we had that process. So we were saying, we can't do everything. We know lots happens in Horatio's garden, but we can't do everything. So what are your top 3 things? And that was really important, that it was patient-led. But this garden is sort of got influences of Sheffield. We've taken ideas of rivers and waterways, the Riverlyn Valley that cuts through Sheffield, and how the materiality will appear, and the planting. So again, just trying to connect it to its place.
So what have you added here that wasn't at Chelsea?
There's in the sort of angled building, that's the garden room.
Oh look, I've got a little thingy.
Oh yeah, pointer.
There we go, pointy thing. That building, yeah.
So that's the garden room, quite a social hub to the garden. And in the other Horatio's Gardens, it's a really important kind of central point, close enough to the hospital building, which you can see kind of to the north and west. Yeah. Close enough for people in beds to get to and see there's activity happening. And that might be just going out to make a cup of tea, or a class, or artists, all sorts of things, really, music. That's quite a social hub. And then up at the top, we've got our greenhouse.
What's that?
That's the gardener's, very important gardener's office and storage areas.
Oh, nice.
Again, and that we did a lot of work trying to plan out strategically where all those components go. So the gardener's office has been put close to the consultants and nursing team offices, so that there's very close interaction in terms of the sort of occupational health dialogue. And so we've got raised beds up by the greenhouse, we come down into a kind of more central open space where people gather, and there are umbrellas there just simply to give lots of shade, because when you've had a spinal injury, different kind of temperature regulations. And then we move down into that exactly, and these are two of our pods. One comes from Chelsea. Well, I'm not sure which one, we haven't decided yet.
Let's say it's that one.
And then the other is basically made from the same details, and they're really beautiful timber shingles, Welsh-grown timber shingles. Everything in those pods is kind of lovely natural materials, timber, cork inside, lamb's wool insulation. So it's kind of about connecting people back with. It's a contrast to that quite sterile environment of the ward. So, and then dotted around are a number of our cairns, which for those who came to Chelsea were quite a hit, and particularly the contractors who really enjoyed watching the stonemasons work. But the amazing dry stone wallers, Lydia and Bert Noble, who come from 200 years of heritage of dry stone walling, not far at all from Sheffield, came and did our cairns, and the cairns are symbolic of wayfinding. So this idea of find things that mark a path when maybe it's unclear, that others have been before and have left a marker, and we all have our different routes through that, but it sort of helps guide the way. So we had 3 of those at Chelsea, and I think we have 7 in Sheffield.
Yeah. Okay, so that's and in Cleve, as you built the first Horatio's garden, you didn't really have the benefit that we've had of watching the mistakes that you made and trying not to repeat them. I mean, what was it? How was the experience of building the first one?
Well, yeah, that was quite amazing, because my cousin's husband, who was my best friend, he broke his neck I don't know, 20 years ago or so. So I knew Salisbury Hospital. He ended up there, spent a year there. So I was having this conversation with Olivia, and I knew I was going to do it even before we put the phone down. So I said, look, I know this place, and I know how awful it is there. Because it was just a really horrible, sort of depressing children's playground. And there was like a smoker's corner where, people would just go out, just to, not necessarily to smoke, but just to actually just get outside. So it's a very depressing sort of place. And so, yeah, it was a no-brainer to take this one on. And Olivia was a star. She is Superwoman, you know that.
I'm fully aware of that.
So, it was a good experience all around. But, yeah, I was the guinea pig, and you all benefited from my cursing and slaving.
Exactly, but it's an extraordinary experience building one of these gardens, and the way that what sort of struck me about it is that most of my work is building gardens for nice people, and you're building gardens for thousands of people. This garden will affect thousands of people over the next 10, 15, 20 years. Not just patients, but their families and their staff and anybody walking through it and all that kind of stuff. It is an extraordinary privilege to be able to do it. And as you've got the newest one at the moment, not for very much longer, because we've got Belfast very soon indeed. And how was it? How was it for you, Sarah?
Do you know, the biggest challenge, I think, is imagining what would you want if you were in a wheelchair. And my father was in a wheelchair for the last few years of his life, and he really wanted to go to wild places and see nature. And yet you're in this hospital environment, and you want to be in greenery, yet you have the practicalities of fire exits and turning circles and wheeling hospital beds out. And so it is, I mean, Hugo and Charlotte had touched on this, how to change the surface, how to have enough planting area to create that feeling of escapism, like you're in nature. And so I really, I solved that by having lots of sort of trellises, so the plants can grow up and over, and in time that will really kind of address the balance or the ratio of hard to planting. But the challenge, and Olivia is amazing at dealing with the administration of the NHS.
Thank God we don't have to do that.
Because that is challenging. So
yeah. I mean, it is. I think that we all agree. It is an extraordinary experience. As is, says he, bringing it back to the subject, as is the experience of exhibiting at Chelsea Flower Show, and how that's sort of changing. I mean, since your first one, Cleve, you were sort of, I would say, one of the sort of pioneers of trying to make your gardens as sustainable as possible. Do you think that's fair?
Yeah, that is fair, because I had a similar experience. My very first show garden at Hampton Court, they just demolished the whole garden, and there was even an olive tree in the skip. And it broke my heart, and I just swore I'd just never do that and just try and do as much as possible. Obviously, there's some things you have to skip at the end of the day, but try and reuse as much.
It's a tricky thing. It is a flower show. The gardens are only there for a short space of time. So the first stage of trying to make it more sustainable is to make sure that they have somewhere else to go.
Ideally, yeah. But I mean, because I'm getting old now, I'm starting to think that even just the business of lifting a living, growing tree and bringing it to Chelsea, then taking it out, and then languishes at the back of the nursery and eventually dies. I mean, even that's upsetting.
It's not always that depressing, you know. Sometimes it comes out and is replanted and loved forever.
But this year, we got round that this year by using a dead tree, a tree that was already...
It was this one that you killed earlier.
Fortunately, our tree was being demolished. It was being dug up to make way for a new reservoir at Crocus.
Right.
It was just so lucky because I was having sleepless nights about that. Where am I going to find this tree? So I was able to use a tree that was going to come down anyway. So we gave it a good send-off.
Yeah, no, it had that. And since when was your first garden, Hugo? But before you took up with her?
2014.
2014. And yeah, that was before you'd done one at all, wasn't it? Yeah.
I'd planted other people's, but I hadn't done one at all. No, yeah.
And have things changed since 2014?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, totally. I think the use of the materials and the choice of materials that we're using absolutely has changed. I think the element of even that garden got rebuilt. That was actually in I had an email about 2 years ago. It went straight into Vauxhall, and a car drove into it and parked in the middle of it, which is quite nice. But yeah, I think even that garden, I built it in a way that I knew it could be unbolted and used again, because Cleve, I think it was Hampton Court, it all went into a skip, my first one, because I hadn't really sort of processed what would happen afterwards, and you're so excited about building the first garden. And then now, going forward, although it's still being rebuilt, but even the materials to start with have a lower carbon footprint to even start with.
I think it's sort of going in the right direction. It's a difficult thing to make a show of that caliber and that size perfect, I think, and we have to try and get there as close as we possibly can and just keep getting better and better every year is what we're really after. What about the work that you do outside shows and things? How are you dealing with sustainability in your general practice, you two?
I think it's about intention in design, in the design process. I think partly our approach around storytelling and local kind of heritage and references actually is quite reflective of, not shipping materials for miles and miles and miles, vernacular materials, local craftspeople, trying to really think carefully about what the sort of carbon impact is. I think, we're starting to specify more and more how things are made, trying to use cement-free products. It's tricky because there are, issues with it. It takes longer to go off, that kind of thing. But I think it's about intent and also having those conversations with clients really early on. And I think what's quite interesting is, I don't know if you feel the same, but I feel we talked about it a lot to clients when we'd get commissioned for work, and now they ask us about it first. And that feels like quite a seismic shift over the past kind of 2 or 3 years, that people really want that. They really want to understand how we can manage water better, how we can plant better, how we can be responsible in terms of impact.
Cleve?
Yeah, the same. I'm just starting to get first clients who are starting to ask about that. I mean, I do have some clients who actually don't care much at all. And, there's some projects where I'm too far down the road to actually backtrack and think about things. But certainly with...
Is that the ones with all the plastic grass in it that you keep doing?
Exactly that, yeah. But lately we've had some really interesting clients who are really on that page now, and it's very encouraging.
Sarah?
I haven't had that many clients. No, that put it. No, it doesn't come up in conversation, which is interesting because I just say, I'm doing it or not, and I explain the ways round because once you dig into a certain way, like we've made a huge natural swimming pool somewhere on a hillside without cement and concrete, but by using good engineers that believe in the way you're doing it, you're working, and it requires a real shake-up of the way we structure our working lives. So there's, at the beginning, I will always do a material audit of what materials and local skills are around the area, a bit like what Charlotte touched on. And so that demands more upfront fees because you're spending more time at the beginning of the design process, but it results in more thoughtful, original designs and a more creative process. And then I think it's still a challenge making gardens that are good for, ecology is messy. And I look at what I do is trying to create frames for that messiness and ways of managing that messiness so that a client can walk through planting and hear the buzz of pollinators and butterflies coming up. And that requires a deeper understanding of, the life cycle of a butterfly or, the holly that needs to be nearby. And so it's educating myself all the time and explaining the design intent. But it's difficult. Yeah. And there's no data on...
Well, I guess we are building the data.
I hope so, because I think the RHS, we were asked to do initially for Chelsea a kind of, what's it called? Audit. Oh, no, yeah, carbon
calculator.
To calculate it. And I spoke to a lot of specialists, but there's no data on landscape. They're just like, it's green. It's like, it's not green.
No, I think that's the thing, and everybody thinks that we're the goodies, and actually what we're doing is quite damaging in places, and that's why we have to be aware of that, isn't it? Yes, we're doing that more this year than we did last year. The carbon footprint data collection thing.
Is there some website you can go to do that easily? Because
no, it's not easy. It's an awful lot of. I looked at it and I thought, I can't do this. It's too much. It's too many spreadsheets.
I just ignored it.
Too many stuff.
That's why you have to sort of stay local and use your common sense.
That's it.
Minimise.
I do like what you said about
waste.
the knowing about life cycles of insects, because I just know nothing. I mean, I think I know more than most of my clients, but I just know nothing by comparison to an entomologist. And we almost need to have some sort of teaching in entomology and biology.
No, absolutely it is.
Just to understand all the life cycles.
Yeah. How's the entomology of the car park in Sheffield?
Pretty low level.
It's got woodland next door to it. There might be something in there.
Yeah.
I mean, but more than just a couple of copies of Penthouse and some fag ends.
Yeah. No. James, you shouldn't leave those things behind. That's the thing.
It is. No, I mean, I think it's quite interesting what they were doing. Shush, behave yourselves in the front row. In the Great Dixter, Ferguson's doing a huge amount of stuff about seeing what's there and having. You heard his story. He had the British Spider Society rented Great Dixter to come for a conference or something, and they went out for a coffee break, and they went wandering around the garden and discovered 11 new species in the compost heaps. Because it's there. Because I think the problem is that when people are looking at the ecology of a place, they slightly dismiss gardens. And they're thinking about fields and woodlands and wild spaces rather than actually gardens. And gardens are, I can't remember what the statistic is, but quite a large proportion of the green area in this country. And what we do is important.
Just another sort of studio project that we're working at the moment that's quite interesting for us, and interesting about Fergus, but also John Little, whose work around reusing materials and crushing materials and planting into those. So we're working on a project in Berlin where we're trying to take nothing off site, and it's completely kind of concrete blocked over. Everything has been lifted, crushed, and then planted into or creating habitat. So we're trying to also think much more. I think we've been okay, but not great in the past few years, but I think much more we're like, what have we got on site? What can we do with it? How do we minimise landfill?
Would you like to join this conversation? Would anybody have a question or anything that they would like to chip in at this point? Okay, well, I've got a public service announcement to deal with first, in that this is somebody's telephone. Is there anybody here who it belongs to? Somebody who knows somebody who lives in North Aston? Yes, it's yours. You've been worrying all the way through, haven't you? That's the next door village to mine. Anyway, so okay, end of that. We do. So now you've had 45 seconds to think of a question.
Apologies in advance for all the photographs he took earlier.
You've won the film of Cleve naked. It's in there somewhere. Yes, over here, lady I've never seen before, and I don't know who she is.
So in designing a Horatio's garden, what do you have to take into account that you wouldn't be taking into account for designing for a private client?
Sarah, do you want to start? Because you've done it more recently.
I think many things. So the hospital grounds itself, my garden is very fragmented, but it's also, most of the hospitals are in a car park, so you have this really intense heat island effect. Then you have, as already touched on, the levels. It has to be incredibly smooth for the wheelchair users who are starting to, and different size wheelchairs, different size hospital beds. Has to be adaptable, and it has to look good all year.
Cleve?
Yeah, I mean, the slope was quite an interesting one, because I really hate raised beds. So I thought we'd slope it down gently to a point where you could get low enough and have the walls up sort of wheelchair level. But even that is unnerving for someone who's just been in a car crash or broken their neck in a diving accident or something. It has to be dead level. I tried to argue my case, but I just got mud thrown at me.
It is a tricky one. Hugo?
Charlotte half mentioned it earlier, but the temperature has to have shade, but like dappled shade, so it's not, one extreme to the other. It's if you break your back, it's harder to regulate temperature, but also increased risk of sunburn. So having lots of opportunities for that dappled shade across the garden.
And I think different ways of seeing is really important, to think about that. And that's, if you're in a hospital bed and you're looking up, that view has to be as beautiful of the garden as if you're looking around at that level, but also having, water features that perhaps are a little bit lower. So if I'm going past in a wheelchair, I can touch it. It's just really understanding there are different ways of seeing and experiencing it. And that's why when we were judged at Chelsea, we asked the judges to go around the garden in a wheelchair, because that was what it was designed for. But I think also it's different, of course, to designing gardens for our current domestic clients, but actually it has helped us think a lot more about it, because an adaptive garden is going to benefit all of us. Good design benefits everyone. And we will all have experiences of disability, whether it's ourselves or people in our family, or we'll break a leg, or we're pushing a pushchair, or, so actually it has made us think, I think, better about what we do.
I wish I'd thought about that for my garden, getting wheelchairs into our garden.
Well, into your Chelsea garden? Yeah, that would have been fun. But there's a lovely a film, actually, when you were building Salisbury. You being pushed around the garden as it was in a bed, weren't you?
Yeah, that's the very first thing we did, wasn't it? You pushed me around. I don't know what good it didn't seem to... I came up with no ideas. You thought I was being clever, but there was nothing in here at all.
You were absolutely being clever, Cleve. I also pushed you around in a wheelchair, and the grass was so ruffled that I actually managed to push you out. I'm sorry about that. I hadn't done my wheelchair skills training in that stage.
I think that's basically the thing. And the other thing that I would add to the essential thing for a Horatio's garden is a really, really good biscuit tin, because it's very, very important. Yes, behind you.
I just wanted to ask a question about aftercare.
Hang on.
Thank you. I just wanted to ask a question about aftercare and your plant choices that you make for those gardens, because I'd imagine the budget's probably, or maybe the budgets are good, but for a gardener, and how you work with the gardeners and for all four of you, really, 5 of you.
Thank you so much. Okay, I'm not just here being decorative, you know.
How your plant choices have sort of worked with that, basically.
Okay, Cleve.
We
What we doing
went
at
for
longest?
sort of high maintenance perennials just to get the seasonal interest, and being the oldest of the Horatio's gardens, ours is now getting to a point where some of the things like Aruncus Horatio, Acanthus, what was the other things? I can't remember. There's some really sort of dominant perennials which now are having to be reined back. So I wish I'd thought of that a little bit more thoroughly.
I mean, I have the same thing because I'm the second oldest one, and we've now got shrubs that are too big. You know, we put them in and they were little tiny babies, and now they're too big. So we have to do a whole lot more pruning this year, and beginning to sort of think of that. And the trees that we put in as tiny as they're now, enormous, great, towering things. And obviously then they're casting more shade, and some of those plants that we put in for the first few years are now having to be changed for other things that are more, you know, But the way that the charity is set up is that, you know, each gardener has a head gardener and a series of volunteers, and it's our job to work with them all the time. And I've been to Glasgow twice in the last couple of months. You were in Cardiff just the other day, weren't you? You turn up occasionally, basically, and you're obviously at a sort of different stage. Are you thinking about that as you're designing? Have you got around to designing planting plans yet?
We've done long lists of planting, because it's getting into planning at the moment. And we wanted to showcase plants, you know, at Chelsea as well, that will link into the Sheffield garden, but also species that do talk to the surrounding area and Sheffield. But what James said, because the charity, you know, do pay for a full-time gardener, and there's an amazing volunteer programme, that the gardens are they're maintained beautifully. They are like Chelsea gardens the whole time. So it allows these gardens to have a higher maintenance within their planting, because they are so, you know, they're so valuable, and they're just looked after all year round.
Yeah, Sarah?
I think it is that challenge. It's like that you have to have instant impact, you have to hide the hospital building, and then things get outcrowded. So it really is, looking after Horatio's garden is art, really. Yes.
As is all gardening, basically, and the art of keeping things alive.
Hello.
I've got one here. Where are we going?
I've got the microphone, so I guess I'm allowed to ask a question.
Hi.
I want to pick up on the data point that you guys all raised about lack of data around sustainability in gardening. So my business measures sustainability in private companies, which could include any practices. But the more important point is we have a partner who helped calculate carbon footprint data. Now, together we did the carbon footprint for the digital accountancy show in June, which was in Battersea Park opposite Chelsea. If we were to offer that to Chelsea, who do you think is the person to offer to it? Is it the sponsors? So actually, you know, the Horatio's Garden trustees? Is it RHS?
The RHS.
How would they respond, do you think?
Well, okay. With my RHS hat on. Okay, so for those who don't know, I tend to judge gardens and hover around, and I'm a vice president of the RHS and all sorts of. I'm a pillar of the establishment. That's what I am.
Delighted to meet you.
They let anyone in these days.
Who invited her? Yes, I mean, we're working with a company at the moment who is doing it, and we're trying to sort of work out, if you have extra things that you want to put in, then talk to me is a good first start, and I'll put you in touch with the shows department, and you know, we're eager and desperate to find ways of doing it. At the moment, we have a system which I think is probably in its reasonably early days, and it's we're borrowing it basically from another company. Maybe we're borrowing it from you. I've got no idea. And just to try and come up with some idea, but it's, as they said earlier, it's quite difficult because people don't really include gardens within it. Yes, buildings. Yes, concrete. Yes, cement. Yes, timber. Yes, steel. All of that kind of stuff, which we use. But then we're offsetting parts of it by having plants. And I think that people think that, oh yes, you've got enough plants in there, that's going to offset enough. It isn't. It isn't. There's an awful lot more there. So yes, we'll have you if you're offering stuff.
I'll come and have a chat afterwards.
Thank you. Do that. Right, I had a question.
Can I just add one thing? Sorry, I'm popping up from the side here. But just to say, for us as a charity, it's incredibly important as well. We're really keen to be able to measure our impact on biodiversity, on carbon footprints and things, because not only from the point of view of being able to show what a huge difference we're making in these kind of effectively urban areas of hospitals where often there isn't any green space. So in Salisbury, there's only 3% of green space in the whole hospital, and 2% of that is Horatio's garden. But also from a funding point of view, it really helps us to be able to make our case, to really show why on so many levels we're making a difference, not only to the people who use it, but to the whole environment. So, yes, please, I'd love to talk to you.
Talk to Olivia as well, definitely. Yes, we had a supplementary.
Sorry,
yes. Shout.
Sorry. I just wanted to ask alternatives for cement and concrete.
Okay.
Are you finding that they're much more expensive? Are you finding landscapers that are resistant to using them? And is it an education process that you're having to go through?
Did you hear all that, everybody? Yeah. Okay. Who wants to answer that one? No? Yes, it is more expensive. Yes, it's more difficult. Let me give it to Hugo.
Yes, it is more expensive. Yes, it's more difficult, but attitudes are changing. Absolutely. I think more and more people are thinking about cement or Portland cement alternatives. Quite a bit of the cost is in just the transport of materials that aren't regularly available, so you don't find a cement-free binder at B&Q, at Bradford's and building merchants, so you have to pay more for transport. So you have to still look quite holistically about still the impact then of the transport, so it depends on how much you're using. So I think with all things, it's about it's about design, it's about working with really good engineers to minimise new material and concrete.
That's what you were saying earlier, Sarah, wasn't it, when you were talking about it?
Yeah, ultimately, I think the expense is in the labour, because it's more labour intensive, because doesn't go off instantly, so the materials for, say, for instance, my Chelsea garden were all either free or minimal, but it was all the budget was basically spent on labour and training. But that to me seems like a really good trade-off, because you're diversifying skills, creating something unique, and the more we know how to make these things, the easier it will be, and we'll come up with shortcuts, hopefully.
Charlotte, you got anything to add to that?
No, I think there are, it's just that it's also not looking to cement as the first option and asking the question. And I think we're getting to a point where we're starting to specify much more in tender packages. So it's kind of from the start a discussion.
Cleve, you can remember when they used wattle and daub. Are you going back to those days?
I was looking for that for this demolished house.
Where am I now? Yes.
I just wanted to ask if there was anything in the Chelsea garden that Hugo and Charlotte did that you've decided won't work in Sheffield, or that you've decided, you can, now that you've won your gold and best in show and everything else, you can say, actually, it didn't really do it for us and we're going to change it for Sheffield.
No, is the answer to that question.
That's a good question.
I can't think of anything that didn't
You don't know
work,
yet until you start actually building it. There will obviously be something, when you're building a garden, it's never exactly as you plan it, is it? There's always something you go along and you think, oh, actually, we're going to move that to there.
No, I don't actually think there was. We will reuse all the terrazzo, the cement-free terrazzo. That will be used as bases in the buildings, and also offcuts will be used as benches, so we're just trialling how we set those. It's too cost prohibitive to use across the whole site, and actually using the resin bound, which is used elsewhere, because at Chelsea we don't want to use it because it's there for 5 days and we have to stick it in a skip. That's a totally different way of doing it. But
and there was things that we knew wouldn't work for the move, so we didn't put them into Chelsea. So we didn't put in any of the windows and the doors on the garden building because we knew that would ruin the warranties when they did get moved, and there's just risk around that. So anything with risk about moving to Sheffield, we actually didn't put into Chelsea to start with.
Okay. Anybody else? Yes, hello.
I just wanted to ask about the longevity of the Horatio's gardens and how the NHS estates side of things, how they envision the application of the idea in terms of lifespan for the gardens, or new designs for new hospitals, and how much of an influence
I think that's a question for you.
your
Actually, Olivia is the one who makes the magic happen.
It's a good question. We take a lease out with the NHS for the soil. There's no money that changes hands, but it's an important document which protects the site and our capital investment. And it also, from the trust point of view, obviously in these cash-strapped times, they don't have enough resource to maintain a garden, even if they wanted to. So it's important from their point of view to know that we are going to look after this space and we're going to treasure it and we're going to evolve it and always take care of the planting. And as they say, it doesn't matter whether you go in on a November's day or a glorious June day, it's always going to be beautiful. So we have that assurance of a lease, which we have to take a 20-year lease with the hospital, which is the longest that you're able to take, but then with a right to renew. We are seeing that there is a bit of a mindset change. So in Sheffield, the NHS are giving us a 42-site car park. Now that has been 7-8 years in the negotiation, and to start with, it was an absolute no. They wouldn't do it. So I think it really does reflect that the Trust are starting to understand the value of this, not only to their patients, to their staff, to their biodiversity, to the whole atmosphere of the working environment of a hospital. And we also see a sort of knock-on effect to other sectors. I mean, we are completely focused on spinal cord injury as our group and our beneficiary group, and we will continue to remain focused on this group. However, if we can influence and have knock-on effect, and we are seeing in most of the hospitals where we've got gardens, that other small gardens pop up, and we may be able to. Our head gardener is on site, so they may be able to advise, or we may be able to grow plants or do planting plans for people. So there is definitely a knock-on effect. There was a big moment in my life when Salisbury were replacing the windows in the spinal unit, and they came and asked us what the colour of the greenhouse was because they wanted to match them. And that is a huge thing. So it does have an impact. It has an impact inside. We see people wrapping the wall of photos of the gardens. And you start to encourage estates people who often are, really push their time. I mean, on an individual basis, everybody, of course, gets this. But the system doesn't support creativity or thinking out of the box. But if you can show people that actually it could be done, and it could be done, back to your question, if it's done right at the start when you're thinking about new builds, it can be done very cost effectively and probably actually brings so much more benefit that the cost benefit analysis would be really hugely positive. And so I think it is starting to change, but there is a huge estate of decaying NHS hospitals who haven't had long-term plans, and so we are going to continue to need to retrofit gardens for many years to come to get it to how all of us would want ourselves or a member of our families to be looked after in. Does that answer? Sorry, ramble.
I think that's a perfect answer. Yeah, all right.
I was just wondering, because you mentioned about music classes and art therapy and maintenance of the garden. Who is it that actually pays for them? Is it the charity, or can you tell me something a little bit more about that?
Well, that's a really interesting question, Mary. Thank you so much for asking me, because we're getting to the end of this conversation. And it allows me to explain to you a very simple thing, is that we're very pleased you came, and we love your presence, and we think you're all very beautiful, but we would quite like you to help us carry on this extraordinary venture with which we're all involved. And Sheffield, the garden that's been designed so ably by my learned colleagues over there, we haven't quite got enough money to finish it. So if any of you would like to help, then now is the chance. Please rush forward and bite somebody's hand off, because we really need you to help us do what we've been doing, what Olivia has sort of conjured up out of this extraordinary thing and this extraordinary legacy of Horatio's. And there are a number of ways that you can do that. The easiest way is basically just come up and press cash into our hands. But there's also, I wrote it down, there's a raffle running around the place somewhere, for which we think maybe, 20 quid a ticket? Does that sound reasonable? And in exchange, if you're very lucky, you will win breakfast at Chelsea next year with Horatio's. And so we'll look after you beautifully there and show you around the show and get you onto gardens and introduce you to gorgeous designers. And none of these lot will be there. Because they're just too exhausted. But we have an endless selection of gorgeous designers. These aren't the only ones that we have. Yes, so we need more money for Sheffield, please. So if anybody has a connection in Sheffield, that would be even better. It's lovely. We also got the next ones. We have other gardens to build. We have not finished yet. This is something that keeps going and going and going, because we feel that every spinal injury patient in the entire country deserves a Horatio's garden, because it's pretty bloody miserable being in those wards without one. Also, we've got an art auction, which is available online, where we have works by such notaries as Maggie Hambling and Sophie T and Quentin Blake. What else? That's it. Do you need any other reasons to help us today? Horatio's is an extraordinary charity. It's a wonderful thing. It's a wonderful charity to be involved with. Every day we walk into the gardens that we've created, and it's a really, really emotional and wonderful moment. I spent a lot of time crying in Glasgow, and there are many reasons to cry in Glasgow. Crying because you're in this garden that is just working and doing what it's supposed to do is a pretty damn good reason for it. So I think that you may go and reach for your wallets and have a drink and do nice things like that. Come and chat to anybody who's connected. The trustees are here. There's Horatio's staff here. There are gardeners here. There's all sorts of stuff. But basically we're sort of done here. So thank you very much indeed, Sarah from Wales. Well, not from Wales, but Horatio's Cardiff. Cleve of Salisbury. Hugo and Charles of Sheffield. And from Scotland, thank you very much indeed.